what are the fields which have fundamentally moved civilization forward? And it's not a very easy question to answer. So I'll start off with the very fundamental basics of what all of us sort of have studied in physics, etc. Is so so this equation everyone is sort of familiar with is that kinetic energy is equal to half mv square. And this all of us are familiar with. And what it essentially says is that there is sort of a direct relation between energy and speed. And this has been there since the beginning of humanity. So we all know that to move something from point A to B, you need to give it some momentum. So you have some mass, you give it some momentum. That mass can be freight, passengers, cargo, and there is some energy consumption which is needed. And what is speed exactly? What speed is essentially how fast you can take something from point A to point B. So speed, in other words, can be called transportation. And energy and transportation have been pioneering fields in the history of civilization, in the sense that anything which has moved civilization forward has always begun with an innovation in energy and transportation. Energy and transportation are very linked to each other, because in order to go fast, you need to apply speed, as the kinetic energy equation shows. And what has been the sort of trend over time is that there has always been a sort of compromise in which the higher speeds you have to reach, there always has to be a proportionally high investment in energy. So that's why planes can travel really fast, is because they utilize a lot of energy. And the reason transportation and energy are so closely linked to each other is because if you look at the oil sector, for instance, 60% of oil and petroleum products are used in transportation sector. And so innovations in transport sort of drive innovations in energy and the other way around. So they're very closely linked to each other. And as I said, just to see how this is a trend, if you look at from the very beginning, you have fire. So wood was a form of energy. Then we discovered oil, then we discovered coal, then we discovered all these things, and those were also forms of energy. Then we discovered that there is something called solar power which exists, and then we discovered something which electricity exists. Then we figured out how to find new ways of creating electricity, and that sort of pushed civilization forward. If you look at transportation, we started with just walking, and then we invented the wheel. If sort of the two iconic things that have separated man from other species have been the invention of fire and invention of wheel, and both of fire is energy and the wheel is transport. So you can sort of see where the sort of linkage between the significance of energy and transport, where it stands, and why it's important. So the wheel, the horse cart, the car, the train, the ship, the airplane, all of them have fundamentally driven civilization forward. So that is where we come to the Hyperloop, and I have this brief video.
Those tubes could be the future of travel. We went to the middle of the desert where one company has started building tech they say will revolutionize transportation. Hyperloop Technologies. Hyperloop, an idea for what the future of transportation could one day look like, famously scrawled on a napkin by tech magnate Elon Musk. It almost looks like science fiction. You sit in a pod and are catapulted through a pressurized tube at over 700 miles per hour.
The architecture is actually very simple. You just remove the pressure from an enclosed environment. We could think of that as a tube. You remove the friction of wheels by levitating that pod inside the tube, and then it takes a very little amount of energy to move that pod at incredible speed.
The technology could change the way you get to work, or even how you go on vacation. The Hyperloop Technologies team is led by former Cisco president Rob Lloyd. We met up at a local pub during Dublin's Web Summit.
I can get from city center to city center in minutes instead of an hour and a half to the airport. It makes us just think completely differently about where we work, where we live, how we live our lives.
Elon Musk came up with the idea, but open sourced it, challenging anyone in the world to make it a reality. Two companies took on the task. One, called Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, is made up of volunteers around the world who engineer and exchange for stock options. And then there's Hyperloop Technologies. Similar name, different team.
The idea, when we think of moving retreats and this kind of transformational technology is a big idea. The thing that we actually find most people ask is, show me. So we actually have the whole company riveted behind achieving our own Kitty Hawk moment.
Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, where the Wright brothers famously achieved the world's first successful airplane flight.
Many people didn't think it was possible.
Sherman Fisherbar knows a thing or two about disruptive tech. He was one of the first to invest in Uber and is a board member of Hyperloop Technologies.
The proof point was when in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, they actually, for the first time, achieved human flight in an airplane. For us, our Kitty Hawk moment is building our test track, 3-mile test track, and doing that at the end of 2016, hitting over 700 miles per hour with our system.
And Fisherbar says Hyperloop won't be limited to just moving people.
The top 15 partnerships in the world can move the world more than all the cars in the world combined. That's 1 billion cars. And so you have a cleaner, more efficient, and less expensive solution.
So how confident are they?
Well, we're going to give you a ticket for that seat 1A on a Hyperloop. And we think that we can do that ticket for 2021, and if we continue to see the progress we're making today, maybe.
So that was sort of a video about the sort of progress which has been done on the Hyperloop. But it doesn't answer a lot of questions. So what exactly is the Hyperloop? Like, where can I buy one? The way to sort of approach thinking about the Hyperloop is to look at the fundamental problems which plague transport, which are there are just 3 problems actually. So as I talked about before, energy and transport are very closely related to each other. So it helps to think of it in those terms. So when I'm investing energy into transferring something very fast from A to B, where is the energy getting lost? So the biggest place where the energy gets lost is the energy which is required to move air from in front of the vehicle. So there are air particles in front of the vehicle. When you move really fast, they need to be removed from the front of the vehicle so that you can sort of imagine it like a knife piercing through butter, and the butter needs to be removed. And that's why sort of the planes that we know, that's why they move at very, very high altitudes, because the air is very rare out there. So they have to spend less amount of energy to get the same amount of air movement out of the front of the vehicle. And the fundamental problems that the Hyperloop sort of aims to solve is air resistance, first of all, friction, second, and third is environment variables. So when you have different modes of transport, you have trains, you have planes, you have road, trucks, cars. One of the things that plagues them is non-uniformity. In the sense that from any point A and B, there's no uniform guarantee that it'll always reach in the same time because of various things like weather and climate and rain and bad infrastructure. The Hyperloop, how does it solve it? Okay. So how do you solve these problems? First of all, you start off with a pod, which can be sized to carry both freight and passengers. And so a pod is not a train. It's considerably smaller than a train, and it's not exactly linked like a train is. So it's its own individualistic entity. And once you size it to carry freight, you can also size it to carry passengers. So you can carry 24 to 50 passengers at one time. The second thing you do is you operate the pods in tubes, which creates sort of a controlled environment. So as I said, the environment was one of the huge problems. So you create a controlled environment in which the pods work. The third thing you do is that you levitate the pods. This takes care of the friction part of it because you're no longer using wheels. And if you look at the first point, this is the major difference between something like the Hyperloop and something like the high-speed rail, which is currently one of the most prevalent fast ground transports out there. And that only caters to sort of passengers, and the Hyperloop also caters to freight. So you levitate the pod so that you remove friction from the picture, and that sort of ensures that the energy input and the energy output are sort of close to each other. It's a very efficient process. After that, you remove all the air from the picture. You reduce the air pressure. So you have vacuum pumps which take the air out of the picture. So air resistance is reduced, And again, another source of energy loss is reduced from the picture. So this is essentially what the Hyperloop is. It's very simple, as in all the technology that is there when all the technology exists. Okay. So where did this come from? Where did this idea come from? So as the video said, it was sort of proposed by Elon Musk, who's the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla. I'm sure everyone knows about Elon Musk. The Californian government, they proposed something to propose a high-speed rail. And India is also going through the same process. We also have a high-speed rail between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, currently sanctioned. And they proposed a high-speed rail, and it was extremely expensive and extremely slow. So what this guy said, okay, I'm going to address the fundamental principles that are plaguing the high-speed rail. So he said that it's going to be safer, it's going to be faster, it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be on demand. So you won't have to wait for it. It'll be immune to weather, sustainable, so it'll be powered by solar panels and solar electricity, self-powering, it'll be resistant to earthquakes, and it'll be not disruptive to those along the route. So it'll be sort of elevated on pylons, which means that unlike the high-speed rail, which is built on the ground, if you build it on pylons, you have to acquire less amount of land, so it's less disruptive to those along the route. And this sort of led to and what he said was, okay, I'm open sourcing it, I don't have the time to do it. So I'm open sourcing it, and whoever wants to deal with it can deal with it. And there have been multiple revolutions and multiple innovations in transport. But why this is sort of unique is what I'm going to fixate on. So first I'm going to start off with what actually drives innovation in the world. So let's look at one of the key moments in humanity, in human civilization, when the Russians reached space. So they had Sputnik. And what this unique phenomena which was triggered off was sort of a nationalistic competitive impulse, which sort of happened across the world. So starting with the Russians, the Americans had their Project Apollo within 12 years. So in 1969, they had a man on the moon. Then within another 10 years, we had ISRO set up, and we had our own satellite, which was set up. So sort of so this whole space development happened within a span of 20 years. And the sort of common trend between this is that nationalistic competitive impulse has always spurred innovation if you look at innovation on a huge scale. What else has spurred innovation? Okay, so let's look at the second thing. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with Germans and Japan and what are the sort of huge products out there. So Germans sort of are very demanding when it comes to automobiles. That's why the automobile industry is very huge in Germany. Similarly, Japanese are very demanding about consumer electronics. So the consumer electronic market is very huge in Japan. So for a product or an innovation to be visible on a large scale, it always has to satisfy a domestic market first. And if you look at the products in India which have done that, you see things like Tata Nano, which was meant for a domestic household, middle-class domestic household. And the only reason Tata Nano is famous and all over the world is because of cost-cutting engineering, is because it catered to a domestic market. The biggest example of this is Hero motorcycles, which not a lot of people pay attention to how important Hero motorcycles' role is in the world. But because they cater to it, they're the largest motorcycle manufacturing plant in the world, a company in the world. And the reason that is there is because they always satisfy the domestic market first. Similarly, there is this thing called the Philips Smile Initiative, which was actually meant for rural villages in India. It's a solar-powered electricity lighting solution. And because it provided off-the-grid power so well, it was adapted in other countries very well. So any sort of innovation which happens on a visible scale, on a global scale, always satisfies sort of a domestic need. Another sort of phenomena that we see in innovation and in sort of revolutions around the world can be sort of, you can sort of look at it, an example is the American Revolution. So what happened was, this happened in America, and within a decade, this whole process of liberalization and all that, it also happened in France. So there is sort of an international demonstration effect which also comes into play when sort of innovation happens. And why so developments in one area sort of act as a catalyst for developments in other areas. And why the Hyperloop is unique in what it is and how it is being developed is that it sort of comes at the unique intersection of both of these three sort of growth factors in innovation. So for India, for the context of India in particular, so on-demand, sustainable, energy-efficient, packetized, weatherproof, autonomous, ultra-safe cargo, transport for both passengers and cargo comes at the intersection of nationalistic competitive impulse, satisfying a domestic need, and an international demonstration effect. And I'm going to explain how that happens in the next few slides. So let's first focus on what our domestic need is. The domestic need in India is for improved transport infrastructure. So what is India's transport problem? India's transport problem is that we have a transport system which is a legacy of the colonial rule. It was meant to transport troops, agricultural raw material, and agriculture, and that's a legacy system. And it hasn't significantly improved since then. So that is our infrastructure is outdated. We have very limited planning and investment in transport. So for the last 30 years, there have been no huge developments in transport, so to say. We've been our transport industry sort of majorly road dominated. There are also a lot of economic trends which are very dangerous, in the sense that they will strain the existing transport network a lot. And our transport services are very expensive. They cost 14% of the GDP of India. So just to compare this, the 8% of GDP in America is devoted to transport, and like almost double of that is in India. And the way to sort of see how much this affects it is to sort of look at, okay, if there's 1% decrease in GDP, there's almost $5 billion increase in the GDP. And that is not a small amount. So there's a huge need for cheap, effective solutions. Another thing is our freight network is completely dominated by roads. So more than 70% of our freight network is completely dominated by roads. And so you have trucks which take around 6 or 7 hours to go from point A to point B. And the problem is trucks use petroleum products. So this is not a sustainable way of infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure, transport infrastructure. So there needs to be some sort of radical leapfrogging in technology. It needs to be done for our transport infrastructure to increase. So if you can see in the graph out there, you can see the sort of investments in rail, road, water, and air transport. And the road is around 60%. So you can see how non-sustainable India's transport infrastructure is. And if it sort of keeps going on the current trajectory, by 2020 it will be around 70%. And the sort of the need is to sort of have like a balanced modal mix between rail and road. So there are a lot of policy changes which have been introduced to take care of this. But how good are policy changes in the long run? So our government actually realizes this, and they've realized this very recently. So this year has been very significant in terms of what the Transportation Ministry has done in terms of improving the infrastructure. So the high-speed rail was approved, it was sanctioned. It's still not approved for construction, but it has been sanctioned, and it was done this year. The transport sector became Modi's top priority as the Make in India program. The Gatiman Express, I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but that after the Shatabdi, which was like 30 years back, the Gatiman Express is the fastest Indian train. Our railway minister also has a lot of huge plans for improving transport. So less than 12 hours train journey from one part of the India to another. We have a national high-speed rail corp set up, and all this has happened within 1 year. So this year is pretty iconic for Indian transport. And sort of one of the main things that happened around like 5 days ago was this. So Mission 350 Plus, which the railways floated an expression of interest to explore, which is a document to explore levitation technology. So the government is slowly realizing that there are problems, and it's looking for solutions. But the sort of questions to ask yourself. Why should technologies like the Hyperloop, which is still not there, should they be adopted in a country like India, in a developing country like India? And the answer to this is sort of summed up brilliantly when I'll put two quotes on the slide. And so these two quotes are from the same person. Says, we are convinced that if we are to play a meaningful role nationally and in the community of nations, we must be second to none in the application of advanced technologies to the real problems of man and society. The second quote is, we have no time, we must leapfrog. And who said these quotes? It was this guy. It was Vikram Sarabhai, which was the founder of ISRO. And this was around when ISRO was founded in 1970. And we see what ISRO is doing nowadays. So I think Vikram Sarabhai hit it right on the nail 60 years back in terms of why such advanced technologies need to be adapted in a developing economy. So as I talked about the community of nations, we have to sort of start with the first thing, which is a nationalistic competitive impulse, which is if a new from transportation has to infiltrate society, there has to be sort of a global ecosystem. So Musk had his Hyperloop Alpha paper, he released it in 2013. And since then, there have been majorly 3 initiatives which have taken this forward. The first is sort of a 2-student competition, which is the Hyperloop's pod competition, so the SpaceX Hyperloop pod competition. So SpaceX said that we are not going to build a commercial pod ourselves, but we want to accelerate the technology more by involving the student community in it. And the reason that is because students have a lot of time. So, and they don't have reputations and money to lose. So they can work on this technology and develop it further without having to lose anything as such. So yeah, so they started the SpaceX Hyperloop pod competition last year. And I was so we were there at the SpaceX Hyperloop. We were one of the 120 teams selected for the SpaceX Hyperloop competition. And it was a pretty enriching experience in the sense that I think I'll play a video and sort of try to get across how enriching it was.
The Hyperloop, a far-out transportation idea popularized by billionaire Elon Musk, officially came to Texas in the form of hundreds of eager, bright engineering students participating in the first Hyperloop pod design competition, representing 120 colleges and 3 high schools. They were all gunning for the ultimate prize, the chance to build and test their design on Musk's personal Hyperloop track in California this summer. You know, this is the first major Hyperloop event. So we're going to be confident. We want to show off for we've done. When we saw the announcement, imagine an aluminum pod filled with passengers levitating on a cushion of air and traveling through an elevated tube at transonic speeds. We're talking 700, 800 miles per hour, slightly faster than a Boeing 737. It sounds fantastical, but it's closer than you think. These students are at the forefront of that movement. More efficient obviously, this is like a big idea. It doesn't exist yet in the world because it has the chance to actually happen.
Videos working.
Videos working. Or technology we know, and the systems we know now. So I'm very excited for the future. It's really not about winning. It's about really products as a whole and something that I hope is as a whole. I think it's something that we say, so one of my energy, a little more, I want it so hard. So we realize that, oh, okay, we are processes to complete, and we need to support the program. We came from all over California, Wisconsin, and Washington, as well as South Africa and Pakistan. We presented new designs for Hyperloop pods, stations, subsystems for levitation, propulsion, pressurization, braking. So we're just talking about pod, it'll be about 4 weeks long, but I'll kind of have this conversation. So it's not, it can fail, but it has to fail gracefully. So they're called this engineering. There's some great skills in different designs. All the people are very passionate about the technology and about how you find the process. So it's great to see the vibe and the excitement for transportation is palpable, right? But students were the only ones in attendance. Several of the Hyperloop companies are actively involved in building Hyperloops for their city acquisitions. Increasingly connected with building, but Shocker was a surprise appearance of Musk himself, who offered a sneak peek at this summer's pod race in Indianapolis. Crowd would pick like a rock star, and he let the pavilion and all their efforts were about to pay off.
So that was what the SpaceX Hyperloop pod competition round 1 was. So round 2 was announced 3 days back, and so the whole circle of engineering begins again. So they're using this iterative process of engineering competitions to sort of increase the technology and make it better. And their whole philosophy is to keep it open. So whatever improvements and whatever technology that they find in the first competition, they're going to open source it to make the second competition even better. So one of the two pods which have already been developed, so like the tangible things which have already been developed, are the MIT and the TU Delft pods. And the MIT pod, as you can see, is the red pod, and you can see how it's designed. I won't go into the technicals. So I actually had an opportunity to meet the MIT team this summer, and they've made spectacular progress in a very, very less amount of time in terms of the pod. The TU Delft pod has also progressed a lot. The TU Delft pod actually is very unique in the sense that they have a large number of sponsors. They have everything figured out. They have almost all of Europe sponsoring them, and they single-handedly have fueled the sort of nationalistic urge for Netherlands to actually improve their transportation system. So, yeah, so this sort of competitive impulse and sort of student competitions have a lot of impact on personal growth. Another one of these companies is Hyperloop Transport Tech. It was there in the video before also. And the way this company is unique is that there are no full-time employees, in the sense that everything is crowdsourced, and employees work in exchange for stock options. So there are no full-time employees, there are only part-time employees, and if it becomes big in the future, then they hit gold. So this is the sort of thing they're developing. They're developing this in Quay Valley in California. The company which is making the maximum amount of progress in terms of developing the Hyperloop on a commercial basis is this company called Hyperloop One, who has a tagline of "Be anywhere, move anywhere, connect everyone." And it's sort of interesting to understand how speed changes things, how easily and efficiently getting from one place to another, how does it change civilization fundamentally? And the closest analog which I can think of is optical fibers. So when optical fibers came into play, they severely changed, they disrupted the way information was transported from point A to point B. And ways to transfer, and the moment you have that, you have something like the internet which can be set up. And the reason the internet has set up is because of infrastructural changes like the optical fiber. So the Hyperloop sort of promises to be something like that, in the sense that you can think of it like as an enabler for a global network of moving people, freight, cargo from point A to point B, just like the internet moved information from point A to point B. So in terms of that, I think the Hyperloop is a very disruptive technology, and we'll see a lot of progress in this in the coming few years. And this company is sort of the most promising till now in terms of developing the Hyperloop. So they had their first propulsion test earlier this year in May, in which they used a linear electric motor to get from 0 to 100 miles per hour in 2 seconds. To put that in perspective, so the fastest commercial car is the Tesla Model S P100D, and it goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 2.5 seconds. So you can see the acceleration is around 2.5 Gs for this. So they did their first hardware test earlier this year in May, and their plans are to have a full-scale development Hyperloop by the end of this year or the beginning of next year, just January or so. And this will be the Kitty Hawk movement, as the video said, which was similar to Kitty Hawk in case of the Wright brothers. And they have a lot of plans, they have a lot of hardware, they have a lot of funding to develop this thing. And the unique thing about what they're doing is not just developing technology, but they're also sort of looking at how it can be implemented. So they've already sort of started scoping studies and feasibility studies in Stockholm and Helsinki. So connecting Finland and Sweden, how will it change sort of the economy of the Nordic region? And it's if you look at transport, commercial users buy transport because it's shiny and it confers some sort of status upon you and it's fast. But why do governments buy transport? Governments buy transport because it's useful. And what do you mean by useful? When you're going from point A to point B, say you're going from Mumbai to Bangalore, it takes you around 2 hours by train. More than that, sorry. And by the Hyperloop, that would be around. It takes you around 5 to 6 hours by train. And by the Hyperloop, that would be around an hour or so. And how that is sort of, you can sort of imagine how that changes things, because you can sort of live in Mumbai and work in Bangalore, and you can take advantage of whatever sort of Silicon Valley atmosphere that is there in Bangalore, just because of the fact that transport between Mumbai and Bangalore has become so easy. So the sort of economic returns are what the government looks at. What sort of socio-economic benefits transport has, how much effect it has on the GDP. So if you can imagine it, if you imagine how iron and steel works, iron and steel industry works. The iron and steel industry is the backbone of the economy. Like anything that you can imagine is sort of derived from iron and steel. And if you can get iron and steel from the port to the factory, if you can get the time down from 7 days by truck to hours, that has a ripple effect across the entire supply chain, which reflects across the entire industry. So all your iron and steel products sort of all simultaneously reduce in cost because of this speed up in transporting, in this sort of reduction in the transportation cost because of the speed. So it has enormous financial returns for the community as a whole. So you're basically bringing markets together, you're bringing people together, you're bringing industries together, and you're sort of creating super regions. And that sort of, as I said, started in the beginning, what fundamentally moves civilization forward. So this fundamentally moves civilization forward. So they're looking at scoping studies for Stockholm and Helsinki, between Geneva and St. Gallen in Switzerland, Los Angeles and surrounding areas in America. They also have a tie-up with Moscow, and they're exploring it there. So they actually have a plan of making the Hyperloop a reality by 2020. So moving cargo by 2020 and moving passengers by 2021. So it's a very ambitious schedule, but they are sticking to it, and they're going to have their first development test later this year. That's something to look forward to. And one thing that they've started is something called the Hyperloop One Global Challenge. They're again sort of cashing in on the competitive impulse that is there around the world to gain new technology. So what this competition basically is it's sort of it's a non-engineering challenge. So the SpaceX competition is an engineering challenge. And this is a non-engineering challenge in the sense that it asks you to make an economic, transport, policy, and legal case for the Hyperloop to be built in a country, in a region. So what they're essentially saying is that how well do you know your region? How well can you highlight the potentiality of your region? And how can you put it in terms of a case study? Can you get stakeholders together who can actually make this a reality in the future? So if you look at the sort of participants in this competition, it seems like everyone wants a Hyperloop. So these are sort of registrations till date. And there are some 500 plus registrations from some 80 countries. And so it's not exactly a student competition. It's open to all sorts of people. Like companies can participate, individuals can participate, research institutes can participate, governments can participate. So yeah, it's a very open competition. And the sort of people participating in that are people from NASA, AECOM, which is an infrastructure firm, Intel, Google, KPMG, which is a consultancy body. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of international interest in what this technology and what benefits it holds. So there are sort of two parts to this whole Hyperloop conundrum. There is a non-engineering part and there is an engineering part, and both are equally important. And it helps if the regulatory environment, the support, the global ecosystem of stakeholders is created well in advance for the technology to be adapted really quickly when it comes. So how do we bring the Hyperloop to India? Now, there are a lot of challenges which are there. So if I just start rattling them off, investment for infrastructure is a huge problem. Maintaining low vacuum is a huge problem. It requires a lot of energy. Thermal expansion, seismic activities, earthquakes, NIMBY, which is actually, it stands for not in my backyard, which is basically a curious human phenomena in which people want to see development happen, but they don't want innovation in their backyard. So they don't want it to be close to them. They just want it to happen somewhere and not disrupt what they are doing. So that is a sort of attitude which is always there, which will have to be dealt with. Bend radius is a huge problem because when you're traveling at very high speeds, you want to ensure that it's completely straight so that you don't have some sort of centrifugal force acting on the people and propelling them here and there. Safety is one of the concerns. Levitation, obviously. Acceleration, deceleration is the main sort of consumer of energy is sort of the acceleration deceleration process. So making that better is one of the problems. System complexity, it's a very complex system. So breaking down into simpler components and then dealing with them. Power and what is the power consumption and braking. So there are a lot of sort of, this is sort of a big picture idea of what challenges are there. But the essential takeaway is that none of them are actually impossible to solve. If you look at it from a fundamental physics standpoint, none of these problems are actually impossible in terms of physics. So yeah, so how do we go about solving them? So essentially, you can divide this whole thing into two parts: so non-engineering and the engineering part, and we're dealing with both of them. And the engineering part can be divided. So I start off with the engineering part, which is very important. So it can be divided into majorly 4 parts. So I know the audience mostly consists of engineers. So it's better to pay attention to this part more than the other parts. So what is command and control? So things like telemetry. What are the different factors that the pod has to take? So the pod is not moving in an isolated environment. There are a lot of various things which are happening to it. So there has to be some sort of real-time feedback that it's receiving from its environment. There has to be some real-time action that it's taking based on what it's receiving. So basically, control systems is what the command and control thing deals with. So if you have experience with some sort of control system architecture, of some software architecture, real-time software systems, this would be one of the things you would be dealing with. So basically, what sort of factors does the pod need to sense the attitude? So what is the sort of relative orientation with respect to the environment with the pod? What is the thermal energy? What is the heat? What is the speed it's traveling at? What are its relative coordinates? So stuff like that, the command and control system deals with. Then the structure subsystem, which basically deals with how the pod looks and how it behaves to its surroundings, in the sense that so aerodynamics is one of the big parts of the structure. So when you're moving at very, very high speeds, one of the huge problems is to make it more power efficient. You need to ensure that there is a minimum amount of drag. And by drag, I mean the amount of air that is displacing should be more for the amount of energy that goes in. So aerodynamic drag is one of the things which has to be reduced, and the structure system sort of deals with things like what is the aerodynamic shape of the pod, how do you optimize the best shape, how do you reinforce that shape, so what sort of struts and supporting structures and load bearing structures you have in order to support such a huge thing, in order to make it more stable, make it more robust. Another subsystem which is there is the electrical power subsystem, which basically deals with batteries and battery management, and because the pod power is one of the huge things that the competition asks us to deal with, and making batteries, making sure the energy is stored well, making sure it's utilized well, is one of the criteria to making an efficient system. So the electric power system sort of deals with the energy aspect of the whole pod. Propulsion is slightly misleading, the subsystem name, in the sense that it deals with things like levitation, braking, lateral control, suspension, and I'll basically explain what these terms mean. So one of the things that the competition says is that the only criteria for judging is how fast your pod is going and how fast it brakes and whether it brakes or not. These are the most important things which factor into the judging criteria of the competition. And what propulsion deals with is things like levitation, braking, lateral control, and suspension. So what is levitation? Levitation is levitating above the surface. So there are different technologies. You can use maglev, you can use air bearings, you can use, there's some teams in the competition which have actually done away with levitation, they're actually using wheels. So the levitation sort of deals with whether the pod, how the pod sort of stays up in air and what sort of friction it's reducing. So the skill sets that you need is sort of experience with magnets, modeling electromagnetic waves, and generally some sort of curiosity about how levitation and these technologies work. So levitation and braking are pretty important parts of the thing. And apart from that, you have lateral control and suspension. So you want it to be a smooth ride, so you want to have some sort of suspension built into the ride. So levitation, braking, suspension, lateral control are parts of the propulsion subsystem. And that's the engineering subsystem. I want you guys to have questions about this later on. We'll answer the questions later. So just keep this big picture in mind. Then we go to the sort of non-engineering side, which is the Hyperloop One Global Challenge. And I'll give you a rough idea what the timelines of these challenges are. So this engineering competition was announced. The iteration 2 was announced like 3 days back, and the timeline is sort of it. The working pod has to be built by summer 2017, and that's a very restrictive timeline. But in true spirit of what SpaceX does, they've basically imposed their own internal rigorous guidelines to us. So the timeline is pretty intensive, but we are in a position in which we are in a good position to meet those deadlines. So that's the SpaceX Hyperloop competition. That's the engineering part. Now there's something for the non-engineering people also. So there's as I said, I talked about the Hyperloop One Global Challenge, and that basically deals with how feasible it is to have a system like this in whatever region you're working with. So even that can be sort of divided into 4 parts. So first of all, whatever corridor that you're considering, and by corridor I mean so when I say Delhi-Mumbai corridor or Mumbai-Ahmedabad corridor, high-speed rail corridor, I mean all the points along that route which sort of constitute that corridor as a whole. So first of all, you have to select a very feasible corridor which has a lot of economic and market opportunities for the Hyperloop to be set up. And what do I mean by economic and market opportunities? There should be some amount of passenger and cargo flow, which should have some sort of economic returns. And the reason India sort of trumps every other country in terms of this is we have huge passenger flow and we have huge cargo flow, and a lot of this is just done by roads and by very inefficient rail system. So there is a huge sort of potential for us to highlight our passenger and cargo flow from multiple cities. So between Mumbai and Bangalore, Bangalore and Chennai, Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, there are a lot of opportunities for us to win just based on raw passenger and cargo flow, as in terms of raw market opportunity for the Hyperloop to be here. So there are like multiple strategies to go about this, and we'll talk about that maybe some other time. Another thing is transformation strategies. So this needs some sort of creativity with respect to how the Hyperloop can sort of fundamentally change a region. So you have to sort of think in terms of, okay, if I'm linking two airports together via a Hyperloop link, how is it changing things? If just-in-time deliveries are reduced from hours to minutes, how does it make things better? If I'm linking two huge metropolitan cities together, it's sort of creating a super city, and what sort of economies are getting balanced? What sort of new opportunities are getting created? What market opportunity exists, business opportunity exists for Hyperloop to thrive between that region? So that's sort of a very creative side of the process. That so if you're interested in economics and human beings and civilization and how the dynamics of all these things come together, transformation strategies is one thing that you'd like to be involved in. There's also government and policy. So when new infrastructure comes into a region, you need to deal with things like transport appraisal models. So so when the new form of transportation comes in, there are a few forms which need to be filled. Some things that the government looks at. Okay, is this feasible? Does this have a good return on investment? So yeah, so the government has a lot of regulations, a lot of risk mitigation processes. If you're interested in government and policy, so there are a lot of legal and transport policies out there as to what sort of investment has to be put in, what sort of public-private partnerships have to be formed in order to fund transport of this sort. Government and policy is one of the huge huge factors. The most crucial thing is the acceleration plan. So once the technology is there, you as a team, what can you offer to Hyperloop One in order to accelerate the development of the Hyperloop region? And that is why we are sort of focusing, because we as students, we can't really offer them anything in terms of acceleration. We can't offer them, okay, we'll make sudden policy changes and we'll introduce legal measures, we'll decrease land acquisition rights, we'll make it easier, we'll reduce the number of forms you have to fill. We as students can't do that. So we are focused on sort of creating partnerships with influential stakeholders, which help us do that. So what do I mean by influential stakeholders? So you have to look at what sort of people are benefited by the Hyperloop, and that list of people is huge. So private sector businesses, their whole business conditions change. The transport operators are severely affected by the Hyperloop. Academics and researchers, which Pilani is. It's sort of an academic exercise, creative exercise to see how something like this can happen. Innovation agencies, public sector ministries, architectural firms, investors, economic development agencies, regional and national governments. So sometimes governments have such infrastructure just to improve the profile of the region. So yeah, so to improve. So we are looking at stakeholders like this. So developers, which will look at transforming property values. By transforming property values, I mean when you're linking sort of clusters of regions together. What you're essentially saying is that you can live. Say, I'll give you an example to explain this. So Bangalore is very crowded and clustered, and it's difficult to and rent in Bangalore is very expensive. So if I have some place sort of 100 kilometers from Bangalore, where I can create an apartment, and I can tell the person living there that you can just board a Hyperloop and come to Bangalore and work there and go back. The property value of buying the apartment there also increases. So it's sort of the economic returns of having the Hyperloop are huge, and then it transforms property values. Engineering firms and urban mobility designers. So there are a lot of stakeholders involved in sort of making transport like this come to fruition. And till now, we sort of focused on having collaborations with multiple people. So we have people from Pilani, of course, from this Pilani University, Goa, Hyderabad, and Pilani campuses. We have people from the Indian School of Business who are dealing with business policy and legal parts of the challenge. And they obviously have their own policy institutes and infrastructure institutes, which they have experts who deal with this. We also have social corps on board, and social corps sort of deals with data acquisition and visualization, which is important for the passenger and cargo flow part of the challenge. We also have RITES. RITES is the Government of India enterprise which does feasibility studies for the railways in India. So we have the advice and we have the support of rights. We have Hero Motor Corp, which is the largest motorcycle manufacturing company in the world, and we have their supply chain expertise with us. Also, I am Ahmedabad with a lot of experts in transport policy. So we've successfully tried to create a sort of overall ecosystem for this to happen, so that when the technology is there, it becomes easier for it to be adapted. So we're basically dealing with both the engineering and the non-engineering parts. And there has been a lot of confusion between what BITS Hyperloop and Hyperloop India is. So Hyperloop India is sort of a multi-stakeholder consortium of all these people, all these institutions together. BITS Hyperloop is just the BITS contingent, which is majorly dealing with the engineering part. And so we are dealing with this CSS Hyperloop pod competition, while we are also helping these people out with the whole case study part of the challenge. Now there's a lot of confusion about how this sort of team works. So there is one of the unique things about the team is it's spread across multiple campuses, and we are sort of and it's sort of difficult because it hasn't been done before. It's sort of difficult to imagine how this would be working out. So these are a few of the tools that we use to collaborate. So this sort of open source collaborative thing is sort of unique to the Hyperloop in the sense that a lot of development of the Hyperloop has happened because all the information has been open and it can be used by anyone in the world. So we sort of try to foster that same culture, that same open source culture inside our team. And so we're basically based out, our virtual collaboration happens through this medium called Slack. And Slack is a platform for chatting. It essentially aims to replace email. So you can share files, you can chat, you can add people, you can make channels, you can distribute work. And you can do all that through one single platform. We also have a Trello board, which basically helps to sort of list out all the tasks that you have, and you can assign the tasks to different people. We are using Google Drive, using GitHub, using all these softwares. Autodesk Fusion 360 is actually the crowdsourcing. It's sort of the online version of the online SolidWorks in the sense that you can collaborate easily. So it sort of saves versions of the model that you're working with, Autodesk Fusion 360. So multiple people can work on it together. So we sort of try to create an ecosystem of collaboration. And we're not just limiting this to bits, in the sense that we also reached out to. So one of the unique things about the competition is it encourages collaboration between multiple schools, multiple colleges. So we reached out to IITs, and we are also collaborating with these people, and just making sure that there is a huge national interest and national competitive impulse that actually develops to take this forward. So, and one of the things which is important is that we have sort of tried to maintain a lot of transparency, in the sense that everything that we are making, everything that we're developing is always open to everyone. So all our code will be on GitHub. You can view it anytime. We have a newsletter so if you have subscribed to bit.ly/bitshyperloop, there'll be a newsletter which basically updates people of the progress that we're doing. Also, the recruitment process is unique in the sense that anyone can join anytime, and it's on a rolling basis. So there's not one recruitment test. The moment you're ready to join, you can just apply, and if you're good enough, then you can join. So it's because it doesn't make sense to have a one-time recruitment process, because multiple people they have different paces of learning. So you might be very proficient in something at the end of the semester, which you might not be at the beginning of the semester. So you can apply then also, and if you feel ready to join then please do so. So it's a very environment, and there's a lot of different ideas, and that sort of thing is necessary for something like this to come about, because if you have a very closed environment and restricted access and all these things, then the sort of innovation that the Hyperloop needs just cannot come about. So that's sort of the crowdsourced collaboration effort. So what are the future plans? Okay. This is important because you want to know what we want to do in the future. So back in May, when I had an orientation seminar, I sort of floated this rough timeline to people. So the green sort of represents what has already happened. The blue represents what was planned. So the first thing, we started off with the first thing back in April, which was make it to the SpaceX Design Week and get a foot in the door. And this is what the plan was. And over the last 4 months, we sort of progressed quite a bit. In the sense that we've collaborated with international build teams. So we have collaboration with the MIT team. We have people who we know and who are transferring knowledge, and we're learning from them in other international build teams. We've expanded to all BITS campuses, and we are currently in the process of expanding to other universities like the IITs, etc., private universities. And this means that we are getting access to HR and manufacturing resources. So we've made a considerable amount of progress in a short time. And the last part is sort of partly done. To create a pan-India initiative, get corporate sponsors and industry experts involved, which will eventually help us to build a version Hyperloop pod. And so this is sort of an amendment to this plan. Is Master Plan 2 is to create a multi-stakeholder consortium for the Hyperloop 1 challenge. We are almost halfway through that, so all the partners and advisors that you saw, those are the part of this multi-stakeholder consortium. And the reason that is done is to make a case study for the Hyperloop in India for the Hyperloop 1 Global Challenge. The second step is to qualify as one of the top finalists in the Hyperloop 1 Global Challenge. So the Hyperloop 1 Global Challenge has, it selects 12 of the top 12 finalists from around the world. And what they're saying is they'll give access, Hyperloop 1 engineering resources, access to them, access to these finalists, and they can sort of accelerate the development of the Hyperloop in their region. And what this will do is, what we predict it will do is put us on the same platform as a lot of other developing economies, a lot of other developing countries. And this will sort of fuel nationalistic impulse to improve transport in the country. As I said, the importance of a nationalistic competitive impulse is very important for developing innovation. And I think getting on the same platform as other developing economies, as other developing nations will fuel that nationalistic impulse. Then we use this Hyperloop stakeholder network for R&D and funding support. So this project requires a lot of financial backing. And the major reasons that teams are successful is because they have a lot of support, national support and university support, and in terms of faculty, in terms of the institute, in terms of sponsors. If sponsors see a promising team, they tend to they're more open to sponsoring them. And this will need a lot of infrastructure investment. They'll need a lot of sponsoring. So maybe around a crore or so. So it's not exactly a trivial effort to finance something like this. So we're ensuring that we're taking steps in order to build some sort of monopoly over the Hyperloop in the country, so that it's easier to fund us, because companies are more open to fund the only Indian team than having to choose between multiple Indian teams. So we plan to use the Hyperloop stakeholder network for R&D and financial support, and this will build a competitive pod, help us build a competitive pod for SpaceX design competition. And again, the reason for making competitive pod, now it's very easy to build a substandard pod, but it's important to build a competitive pod, because if you look at how competition is important in India, the reason our cricket and Bollywood industries are booming is because they're competitive on an international scale. So if you can create some sort of that impulse for transport, that will result in more investment in transport. It will result in more developments in transport, just like the developments in the cricket and Bollywood industry. So it's important to sort of have some sort of nationalistic impulse to have something of this scale actually come to fruition. Then we sort of focus on creating a comprehensive ecosystem of institutional expertise and public-private partnerships. So what I mean by institutional expertise is one thing that is lacking in India is sort of a link between the education system and the industry. So if we have some sort of core institutional expertise in developing transport like this and being aware about the transport problems in the country, it will lead to much better in-house solving of the transportation problem than if we had some other system. So by sort of fostering this culture in universities and making sort of a multi-college initiative. This institutional expertise is sort of taken care of. So this will sort of help accelerate the setting up of an Indian Hyperloop road. So this is sort of a pretty ambitious plan, and it'll take some time and effort. So why should you be involved in something like this? And I've sort of talked about how transport affects different things, and I'll give you some example of how transport, how rail came into place. To give you an example of how modifying transport, how disruptive transport sort of changes things. So Vanderbilt was this industrialist in the United States in the late 1800s, and he had a monopoly over the rail system, the steam rail in the US, and he essentially used it to transport coal from point A to point B. And within 10 years of that happening, Vanderbilt's companies were the most valuable in the United States because he had a complete monopoly over the rail system. And that is and the fact that he had complete monopoly over the transportation of coal from A to B meant that all industries which depended on coal, which was almost every industry, were dependent on Vanderbilt. So it was a very disruptive moment in transportation and for civilization. So why should you be involved? So this is an opportunity to directly affect large-scale, high-profile technology, and this doesn't come about every day. As I said, there are like 3 intersections of a nationalistic comparative impulse, international demonstration effect, domestic need which is being satisfied, and those sort of challenges don't come about every day. They come about once in a millennium or so. So yeah, so large-scale, high-profile futurist technologies that promises to change the world. Interact and engage directly with SpaceX and Tesla engineers. So one of the perks of this competition is that you get to directly interact with these people, and there is no other opportunity as such in India to do it. So they give you feedback on your designs, they give you engineering expertise and stuff like that. So yeah, we know how hard these people work, and the results are all over the news. So yeah, be in some sort of like responsible for the Hyperloop being built in India. And if you look at it in terms of impact per unit effort, putting effort into being responsible for the Hyperloop being built in India seems like nice effort. Also, working on a vastly multidisciplinary problem and learning about a host of different fields in a very short time. So because there are very harsh deadlines, you'll have to learn about a lot of different fields and learn how to problem solve among a lot of different fields simultaneously. And like restricting yourself to one field will result in you being oblivious to other solutions. So yeah, there is a lot of scope for multidisciplinary learning and learning about a host of different fields in a very short time. There's also a lot of opportunities to collaborate because of the open nature of this challenge. Say if you come up with some radical innovation in the Hyperloop, which can be used by people across the world, you'll find yourself collaborating with the top universities in the world, and also top universities in India. So as you said, we already have Indian School of Business, IIM and the Ahmedabad, who are on the non-engineering fronts, and you'll also have chances to collaborate with other people in other universities through the sort of collaboration ecosystem that we've set up through Slack and Trello and GitHub and all these things. So it's a very good opportunity to collaborate, and this is my favorite. So this is sort of self-explanatory. So no, the most important part, how do you get involved in this? So whatever I say from now on, all this is there on our website, which is bitshyperloop.org. And if you want to note it down, you can just note this part down. This is the only important part. You can choose to not listen to whatever I'm saying from now on, and still just go to the website and still get to know the same information. So yeah, so bitshyperloop.org/join. It has all the information on how you can join. I just basically explain what the recruitment procedure is, because it's very different from other tech teams on campus. So first of all, it's on a rolling basis. So one thing that you'll have to keep in mind is that there are a lot of steep learning curves, and if you have a low tolerance for steep learning curves, then it's better not to join. So the way we test your ability to adapt to steep learning curves is I'll explain that. So what you have to essentially do is to submit a Strawman proposal and a short 300-word description about it. Now, what is a Strawman proposal? So a Strawman proposal is a starting point in the evolution of any project. So the way it sort of development is it sort of develops in it's sort of a Strawman proposal, and then it's a Woodman proposal or a Stoneman proposal, and then it's an Iron Man proposal. So that's how proposals in a project actually develop. So a Strawman proposal is unique in the sense that it's not exactly, doesn't really solve a problem. What it essentially is, simple draft proposal that generates discussion of the problem's advantages and disadvantages, and it provokes the generation of new and better proposals. So, okay, so what is a Strawman proposal? Can I be more concrete about it? Yes, I can be. So it should grammatically be of the form, I want to use dash to dash, and blank one should be a skill set, an area of knowledge, a field of interest, or a technique or method that you are familiar with and that you can describe in detail. So that sort of deals with, and I just reiterate further that all of this information is on the website, so you don't really need to remember it, you just have to understand what this thing is, because it might be new to a lot of people. And blank 2 should be a problem related to the Hyperloop in any way. And the reason that we are asking you to submit this Strawman proposal is that we need to know what skill set that you are familiar with, and how familiar you are with those skill sets, and how familiar you are with the application of those skill sets to the Hyperloop. So those two things are the key things that we need to know in order to actually consider you as a potential recruit. So an example of what a Strawman proposal is. So sample Strawman proposal. So I want to use my knowledge of vibrational modes to determine pylon dimensions for the Hyperloop. So, vibrational modes, a lot of you must have done it in mechanical oscillations and waves. And vibrational modes are basically when you have a huge tube-like structure and you have it supported on pylons. Those pylons act as sort of pivots, and the thing vibrates along those pivots. So you need to find sort of an optimal solution as to how can I reduce the amount of vibration if there is some seismic activity or if there's some sort of vibration mode. So the knowledge of vibrational modes helps in that regard. I want to use my experience solving JE thermal expansion problems to figure out how temperature changes will affect the size of the defect gap in the Hyperloop tube. So I don't know how you've solved JE problems. So there's this very famous problem in which there's a ring and there's a slit in the ring, and when you apply the question is, when you apply thermal energy to the ring, does the slit expand or does it contract? So that is sort of a fundamental. So that's not just an MCQ problem. That can also be used to solve a problem like detecting temperature changes and how they'll affect the size of a defect or gap in the Hyperloop tube. I want to use my experience playing video games to imagine the virtual reality experience that will make people inside the Hyperloop comfortable. So yeah, so if you are really good at playing video games and you have an experience of how to design virtual reality systems and how they affect human psychology, what is the best way to arrange things in a 3D surrounding. So yeah, so it's not as simple as it looks, but it depends on what you can do. And yeah, so using technical jargon is okay, and you can submit both non-engineering and engineering applications. So I want to use my experience with creating cost-benefit analysis to compare economic feasibility of the Hyperloop with other modes of transport. So yeah, so this is also possible. So what resources should you get started with? As I said, there will be a lot of steep learning curves. So there has to be some sort of demo to get you an idea of what sort of steep learning curves there are. So we basically have two major resources. The two things that you have to go through are the SpaceX Hyperloop pod competition guidelines, and you don't have to worry about noting this down because this will also be on the website. So SpaceX Hyperloop pod competition guidelines are very important, and there's this Hyperloop comprehensive database on archive.org, and it contains basically everything, every engineering detail, every technical detail about the Hyperloop in one place. So if you can go through that and learn things in detail and identify which areas fit in your skill set. In the engineering sector, this comprehensive database would give you a very good idea to start off with the Strawman proposal. And if you remember that you have to give a 300-word description of your Strawman proposal also. And the description should address why you chose blank 1, why you chose blank 2, what is your experience with blank 1, which is the skill set, what is the experience with your skill set, what is your experience, how exactly do you plan to apply it to the Hyperloop. So there needs to be a lot of clarity between why you chose blank 1, why you chose blank 2, how do you plan to link blank 1 and blank 2. When you're saying, I want to use dash to do dash, why exactly you are doing it. So if you can give an accurate idea of your experience with your skill set and how you plan to apply that skill set to the Hyperloop, that should be one of the major barriers to entry. So that is the engineering part. So basically two things. One is this SpaceX Hyperloop pod competition guidelines, which you need to be very familiar with, and the archive.org Hyperloop comprehensive database, which contains a lot of technical reports, feasibility studies, and stuff like that about the Hyperloop. Then there are also, on the non-engineering front, you need to be familiar with a different set of resources. So the Hyperloop One Global Challenge Guidelines. So all of this is there again there on the website. And you need to be familiar with exactly what this asks of you. And you also need to be familiar with this report by NTDPC, which is the National Transport Development Policy Committee of India, which is the India Transport Report, which basically suggests a route for moving India to 2032. And it has stuff like policy recommendations, government recommendations, transport recommendations, suggestions, statistics, passenger statistics, port statistics, shipping statistics, different cargo statistics. So yeah, it has a lot of things to get started on the non-engineering challenge. So these are the sort of things that you'll have to be familiar with before you can join the team. So if you're focusing on the non-engineering front, you need to go through this report. If you're focusing on the engineering front, you need to be familiar, and that comprehensive database is a good way to start off with making the Strawman proposal. And you can obviously find these resources at bitshyperloop.org/join. Submission guidelines. So the form is at bitshyperloop.org/apply. And these are the sort of only two links that you need to note down. Is that the form where the form is, bitshyperloop.org/apply, and the guidelines which are at bitshyperloop.org/join. So there is no paper test, there is no paper recruitment test. You can ask your friends if you want. If you're thinking about a Strawman proposal, you can collaborate with your friends. And there's no cheating or something like that involved, because every Strawman proposal will be unique. So the guidelines will be at bitshyperloop.org/join, and the form is at this thing. You can submit a Google Doc containing the 300-word description. So if you want to have images or some diagram or some tables in the doc, you can have it directly. You can include the Google Doc link and make sure it's public so that it can be viewed. So the deadline of submission. So Hyderabad has their T1s in the next week, from September 8th to 13th, I think. 8th to So it's from Tuesday, a week from Tuesday. So the deadlines for Hyderabad will be announced after the T1, but the deadlines for Pilani and Goa are Friday, 9 September midnight. So your Strawman proposals so the form just doesn't ask you about Strawman proposals; it also asks you about what areas you want to work with, what has been your experience with these areas, what sort of time are you willing to commit, what is your motivation to work on these things. So it asks you these additional things also. So the deadline is Friday, 9 September midnight, and you should keep checking bitshyperloop.org to stay up to date. I think Dhruv wants to talk for some time. Dhruv, I'll let you take the stage. Dhruv Mahajan is the point of contact.
Yeah, I'm here. I'll speak for 10-15 minutes.
Hello, check, hello.
Yeah, Dhruv, go on.
Yeah, give me a minute.
Yeah, Dhruv.
Okay.